So a good evening, a really good evening, and a warm welcome to everyone joining us today for this evening's CRAE webinar. As you may already know, here at the Centre for Research in Autism and Education, we are a team of autistic and non-autistic staff and students based within UCL Institute of Education and part of the Department of Psychology and Human Development. We aim together to conduct high quality and cutting edge research, but also, and this is really important, we also to ensure that the results of the research reach those who stand to benefit. This CRAE webinar series is one part of that. It allows people both within and beyond academia to hear some key researchers, practitioners, and advocates in our field. Through everything we do at CRAE, we take a participatory approach, which means we work with autistic people in all stages of our research and initiatives, from the initial design right through to the sharing of outcomes. We hope that this means the work we do is meaningful for the wider autistic community. At this point, before I go any further, I'd like to say a really big thank you to our funders, our supporters and team members who contribute to our work and make it all possible. In particular, a very special thanks to the Pears Foundation for their generous ongoing support that underpins everything that we do. As always, we invite you to become part of these conversations, either in the chat or in the Q&A, if you want to be more anonymous. We will endeavour to have as many questions answered as we can by Emeline. And actually, when we get there, we're going to stop the recording at that point. We just talk amongst ourselves. Today, we are thrilled to have the fantastic Emeline Han. Emeline is a final year PhD student here at CRAE. Emeline is passionate about conducting research that is participatory in nature and practically beneficial to the autistic community. Emeline's PhD project used a participatory approach to develop and evaluate a new disclosure decision-making support program for autistic adults, which she is going to present for us today. Emeline, it's all over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for coming to my talk. Let me just share my slides now. Okay, so today I will be presenting a pilot study of a new disclosure decision-making program for autistic adults called Who, When, and How to Share. And although this study was a part of my PhD, I just wanted to emphasize that it was conducted by a team really of autistic and non-autistic members from academic and non-academic backgrounds across the fields of psychology, public health, and social policy. So we are a multidisciplinary team, but we all align with the neurodiversity paradigm and social model of disability, meaning that we believe autism is a natural and valuable form of human diversity that comes with its unique strengths and challenges, and that autistic people are often disabled by an interaction between their differences and an unaccommodating environment. So to provide some background on this study, we know from past literature that autistic adults often face a dilemma of whether to conceal or reveal their autistic identity. Disclosure can sometimes lead to increased understanding and support, but at other times it could lead to judgment and discrimination. On the other hand, concealing and camouflaging may offer some short-term protection from public stigma, but in the longer term, it has also been associated with internalized stigma, stress, and anxiety. Internalized stigma is what happens when people are aware of the stigma that exists in society. They start to agree with those negative beliefs and attitudes and apply those stereotypes to themselves, which can really harm their sense of self-worth and their mental health. So to address this problem, clearly we need more programs that reduce public stigma and create more inclusive environments where it is actually safe for autistic people to disclose without having to worry about facing judgment and discrimination. And I know of many ongoing and upcoming efforts in this area to improve understanding and acceptance of autistic people in society. But at the same time, we know that change can be slow, and While stigma still exists, our team wondered if autistic people may also benefit from programs that empower them to make informed and strategic disclosure decisions. However, to our knowledge, no such support exists for autistic people. Outside of the autism literature, a promising program to support disclosure decision-making is the Honest, Open, Proud program, also known as HOP for short. And the key premise of HOP is that disclosure is a personal decision and typically an ongoing process where the risks and benefits have to be carefully weighed depending on the context. And the theory of how this program may achieve change is that supporting disclosure decisions can reduce stress associated with public stigma and internalized stigma, ultimately contributing towards improved well-being. This theory has been partly supported by research to date, with a recent meta-analysis showing that HOP had a positive impact on stigma stress and internalized stigma for people with mental health problems, while its impact on more distal outcomes like depression and well-being have been less consistent. HOP has been very popular with participant groups, which has led to its widespread dissemination and adaptation for different populations in different countries, including people with Tourette syndrome and people with dementia in the UK. So our team wants to find out if it would be possible and helpful to adapt HOP for autistic adults. To inform our adaptation of the program, we first conducted a systematic review to understand autistic people's lived experience and support needs in this area. Then we conducted a consultation survey with over 100 autistic adults, where we presented our ideas for the program and sought their input on it, including their preferences in format and content. Then, based on the findings of the review and consultation, our team co-produced an autism-specific version of the HOP program, which was informed by research evidence and our own team members' lived expertise. So this table compares the original HOP program with our adapted program. You will see that we changed the name of the program as there was feedback from our consultation that Honest, Open, Proud might suggest that people who don't disclose are not being honest or open or proud, which is not the message that we wanted to convey. The aim of our program was not to push people towards disclosure, but rather empower them to make their own personal decisions. So we named our program Who, When, and How to Share. We also adapted the format of the program, as respondents from our consultation survey said that the original peer-led group sessions may be challenging and inaccessible for some autistic people. That's not to say that autistic people can't participate in or benefit from group programs, but I think in particular in this case, we were looking at people who were quite worried about disclosure or struggling with self-stigma. And people also told us that flexibility and choice would be really key to participating. So we designed our program in a guided self-help format supplemented by optional peer support, where participants would work through a self-help guide, but had the option to contact a trained autistic facilitator one-to-one, as well as join an online forum with other participants if they wanted to. We recommended that participants complete the guide within 3 weeks, corresponding to the 3 main sections of content. This was mainly for the purposes of data collection before and after those 3 weeks, but we did tell participants that they could work at their own pace, and if they could not finish the program within those 3 weeks, they could continue working on it. After that, the materials were for them to keep, and they did not need to submit any of their completed worksheets to us. The first section of the guide was about when to share, which supported participants in weighing the pros and cons of disclosure in different settings. This was based on a piece of feedback we had during the consultation, which is that disclosure is very context specific. So for example, disclosing to an employer is very different from disclosing to a family or friend. So we added examples of the pros and cons of disclosing in different contexts, supported by quotes from research studies to ensure that all these examples were grounded in autistic people's lived experiences. The second section was how to share, where participants had the space to draft their personal story, which they could share with others if they decided to disclose. So the template for the story was based on a neurodiversity narrative, prompting participants to consider, what autism means to them, their strengths and interests, but also their challenges and needs, and how they want to be supported or treated by this person that they are disclosing to. We also added examples of some hurtful self-beliefs that autistic people may hold about themselves, again, taken from previous research studies, and how to rephrase these statements in a more helpful way. So if participants did decide to share their story with others, this could help to challenge public stigma. But even if they didn't, we felt that the story that people tell themselves is very important and could help to prevent or reduce internalized stigma. In the third and final section, who to share with, we kind of laid out potential reactions that autistic people may receive when they disclose and examples of how to respond confidently to what may be a negative or unhelpful reaction. So after we developed the program, we wanted to conduct a pilot study to test it out. The primary aim of the pilot study was to assess the feasibility and acceptability of the program, and the secondary aim was to explore the preliminary impact of this program on psychosocial outcomes for autistic adults. Our study used a single-arm pre-post mixed methods design, which just means that all of our participants received the intervention. We did not have a control group, and we collected a mix of quantitative and qualitative data before and after the program. Our target sample was 20 participants, and we included all autistic adults over the age of 18. There were two additional inclusion criteria that were removed along the way. So firstly, I originally anticipated that the program might be more suitable for autistic people with a formal diagnosis if it's going to focus on diagnostic disclosure. But our autistic team members were rightly concerned that requiring a formal diagnosis might be seen as gatekeeping and reinforcing the lack of support available for undiagnosed adults. So we decided to include autistic adults without a formal diagnosis as well, and we edited the content to make sure that it was applicable to them, discussing the disclosure of an autistic identity more broadly rather than focusing on an autism diagnosis. Secondly, we initially thought that autistic adults who are already openly autistic might not need this program or find it helpful. That was what was suggested by some people in our consultation survey, that this program will not be for everyone. But interestingly, during the recruitment process, a number of participants said that even though they were very or fully open about their autistic identity, they were still interested in taking part. And so rather than turning them away, we wanted to find out a bit more about their reasons for wanting to take part. And there were various motivations. For example, some of them felt that they had been too open in the past and they now wanted to become more careful and selective or effective at disclosing. Some people said that they were mostly confident about disclosing in many contexts of their lives, but they were just unsure about it in one particular new context that has come up for them. Or some people hoped that the program would provide them with a tool that they could use to guide other autistic people who they knew were struggling with this issue. So we included all these participants as long as it was clear that they understood the program and they thought that they would benefit from it. We did not think that it would be ethical to deny them the support that they wanted. So those were our participants. The facilitators were our own autistic members who already had previous experience supporting autistic peers, and underwent a training session that was more specific to this program. So the training session focused on checking each other's understanding of fundamental concepts in the program, having a go at filling in some of the worksheets themselves, and discussing what would be the facilitator's role in the program. All participants received a full self-help guide in a PDF format and worksheets within that guide in a separate Word format in case they wanted to complete it electronically. They received weekly check-in emails from their assigned facilitator, just asking them how they were getting on, whether they had any questions or needed any help. They also all had access to an optional online forum on Slack. This was a closed group that was accessible only to other participants of the program and was moderated by facilitators, and participants could choose to stay anonymous on it as well. Finally, they all received an online survey on Qualtrics before and after the program. So to assess the feasibility of our program, we looked at rates of recruitment and retention, including any reasons for not participating or dropping out from the program. We also looked at levels of reported and observed engagement, including any reasons for not engaging. To evaluate the acceptability of our program, we collected quantitative data on levels of satisfaction with the program and perceived helpfulness of the program, supplemented by qualitative data on participants' experiences of the program. To explore the initial impact of the program, we collected quantitative data on 4 psychosocial outcome measures. This was the decisional conflict scale, disclosure-related distress scale, stigma stress scale, and internalized stigma mental illness scale. So because these measures were originally developed for other populations, our autistic members were involved in adapting them to be more suitable for autistic adults. And in the survey, participants were given the space to leave any comments on whether they found the questionnaires easy to complete and suitable for them. They were also given the space to elaborate on their perceived impact of the program to capture any aspects that may not have been covered by the quantitative measures. So our program garnered more interest than we expected, with 32 participants completing the pre-program survey and enrolling onto the program. But there were 7 participants who withdrew, 5 due to lack of time. They said that they wanted to do it, but they couldn't commit during that time period. And 2 because they found the program too difficult to complete on their own. So one of these participants disclosed dyslexia, and the other disclosed general difficulties in reading and comprehension. So we tried our best to make some accessibility adjustments to the documents, including enabling text-to-speech and speech-to-text functions. And we invited them to try out the materials again, but neither of them responded at that point. There were also 6 participants who were unfortunately lost to follow-up for unknown reasons. These participants had little to no visible engagement since the start of the program, so they were not really responding to emails or joining the forum, and ultimately they became uncontactable. So this left us with 19 participants who completed the program and the post-program survey. This table provides an overview of the participants' characteristics. So our participants' ages ranged from 25 to over 65 years old, with many falling within the middle age range. We had more female than male participants, and most of our participants were from a white ethnic background, which is a limitation of our sample. Many of them were also highly educated and engaged in either part-time or full-time education. Most of our participants had a formal autism diagnosis, and some were quite recently diagnosed, although several of them did not have a diagnosis, but self-identified as autistic. Majority of the participants were selectively open about their autistic identity, although like I mentioned before, there were a few who said that they were already open or very open about their autistic identity before participating in the program. Many of our participants had other diagnoses, some with multiple co-occurring conditions, and they varied in their level of openness about these other identities as well, with some people saying that it was easier to talk about visible conditions than non-visible conditions like autism. So among those who completed the post-program survey, levels of engagement were high, especially with the self-help guide. You can see that all the participants used it. More than 70% of them completed it. And similarly, about 60 to 70% of them used facilitated support and the online forum. Among the minority who didn't complete the guide, reasons included needing more time, focusing on sections of the guide that were most relevant or important to them, which we told them was entirely fine, and the emotional burden of some of the content and exercises. So some of these participants felt like they needed to take a break and return to it at a more appropriate time. There was also one particular participant who reached out to us saying that, after completing the first section on weighing the pros and cons of disclosing, she just decided that disclosure was not the right choice for her at that point in time. And so she was unable to complete the rest of the guide on how to share and who to share with. So we reassured her that, this was a valid choice and a valid way of using the materials, and that she could still take part in the post-program survey, even if she didn't complete the guide, which she agreed to stay on and do. So reasons for not engaging with the facilitator or forum, including not feeling like they needed any additional help or support, not having the time to do so, and social anxiety. But I think it's important to note that participants could benefit from peer support, even if they were not actively emailing facilitators or posting on the forum, which we will see next in the acceptability data. Overall, levels of satisfaction were high, including with the format, content, and duration of the program. All participants found the self-help guide helpful, and those who used facilitator support also said it was helpful. But the perceived helpfulness of the online forum was quite mixed, and the qualitative data gave us more insight into why that might be the case. From the qualitative data, we could understand participants' motivations for taking part in the program and whether their expectations were met. A common motivation was to help oneself with disclosure. Someone said, I was looking to disclose my autism to a new line manager and a new colleague, but wanted help to decide when to disclose and how much exactly to disclose. Some people were seeking support for a recent or late diagnosis, like this one person who said, I was diagnosed late and so haven't had the opportunity to get the same support as children do. And a few of them said they took part mainly to help and advise others about disclosure. After the program, some participants said that their expectations were fully met or exceeded because the program gave them the tools to make much better and much more informed disclosure decisions. But there were some participants who felt like their expectations were partially met because there were parts of the program that worked well for them, and there were parts that didn't work so well for them, which I will dive into next. So many participants mentioned the clear structure as their favorite aspects of the program. They liked the way it took them through a process of understanding and gave them a structure to think it all through. They also liked the detailed explanations and examples, especially the way that elements of disclosure were unpacked together with the risks and opportunity of disclosing. And all this information was balanced with practical exercises and useful worksheets they could use to think through the different options and workshop or try them out. Many participants also appreciated that peer support was available but optional. So they said it was good to know that I could get direct support from someone wired up like me if I needed it, and I found that quite comforting. A few participants also liked that the program was self-guided, so there was time to think without pressure or expectations. Many participants picked the forum as their least favorite component of the program. And this is a bit of a long quote, but I thought it was really interesting, so I wanted to share it. Someone said, being autistic, I would never go over to a group of people and open or join a conversation, even if I knew they were all on the spectrum too. I would feel embarrassed, anxious, not know what to say, and either overshare or keep completely silent. The forum is just the written equivalent. Disclosure is a difficult topic, and although it was interesting reading others' experiences in the guide, the forum was just too much like group disclosure in front of strangers. So clearly, even though we hope that an online anonymous forum would be less kind of invasive and anxiety-inducing than in-person or Zoom sessions, but clearly there were some participants who were still not quite ready to take that step. Now, in the previous slide, although we saw that some people liked the self-guided approach, there were also people who struggled to work independently and stay motivated with self-study. Similarly, although there were people in the previous slide who liked the really detailed examples, some said that the text was too lengthy, there were too many notes and examples. Some people felt a bit time pressured trying to complete the guide within 3 weeks. And some people also shared personal struggles that were not a criticism of the program itself, but they struggled with developing a personal narrative due to the complexities of their own history and circumstances. Participants gave us some very useful suggestions for improvement. Many said that the program and the peer support group in particular could benefit from more facilitation to guide and encourage participation. They also said that although the content was good, the presentation could be improved and be more interactive. For example, it could be presented as a web app, incorporate videos, and give an option for downloading responses. Some suggested to operate the program over a slightly longer time period, and a few participants also had kind of very specific suggestions on additional content that they wanted to see in the guide. Moving on to the preliminary impact of the program, overall scores and sub-skill scores on the decisional conflict scale significantly decreased following the program, which suggested that participants felt more informed, clearer about their personal values, more supported in decision-making, more certain about their decision, and more effective at decision-making at the end of the program. Overall scores on the disclosure-related distress scale also improved significantly, showing that participants felt more comfortable disclosing to a family or friend, an employer or educator, and a public service provider like a health professional, for example, although only changes on the first 2 items reached statistical significance. Participants elaborated on the perceived impact of the program in their qualitative responses as well. And I think a sense of empowerment was quite clear. And someone said the powerful thought for them was to stop and think about their objective in telling someone. I think I felt that some people almost had a right to know that I had an obligation to disclose, but I now realize the choice is mine. Some people said that even though they haven't reached a final decision by the end of the program, they were much clearer in their minds about what to consider, which in itself is a big relief. Some people learned to take a more nuanced approach to disclosure rather than seeing it as a binary decision. They can now tailor it according to different needs and situations. Some people said that the program gave them a valuable framework upon which they can make future disclosure decisions. So a lot of participants actually talked about how they were planning to continue using materials after the program. And I remember one participant who said that, she's going to keep this guide permanently on her phone. Some of the participants also reflected on how they could apply their learning on this program to their other identities, like mental health difficulties, other hidden disabilities, or even their religious faith. In terms of the preliminary impact on stigma, we found statistically non-significant reductions in stigma stressed and internalized stigma, which was also reflected in our qualitative data. So some participants felt like they gained knowledge and techniques to counter stigma in terms of framing things more positively and gauging people's understanding and working from there. But there were some people who felt like the program didn't really have a change on their approach to stigma yet. They would like to get to a stage where they can advocate and directly address stigma, but they needed to build more confidence first. And I think this was linked to first understanding how stigma affected them at an individual level. So there were a few participants who said that it made them realize they still have some accepting to do of their own diagnosis, and that often the stigma that comes from other people feeds into their own anxieties about themselves. So in summary, recruitment to our program was successful and we exceeded our target sample size. However, attrition was high, largely due to difficulties completing the program independently and within the recommended time frame. Similar challenges were observed in another self-guided version of HOP and actually online self-guided interventions more broadly. So while these types of interventions have the advantage of reaching a wider audience and overcoming the barriers associated with in-person interventions, they do tend to have poorer retention since participants are less closely supervised or can get disengaged. And when it comes to disclosure-related or stigma-related programs like this, I think clearly a self-guided format can increase accessibility by offering participants privacy and anonymity. But our study does show that this approach can be challenging for some participants who need more practical support or emotional support to complete the program. Encouragingly, among those who did complete the program, levels of engagement and satisfaction were high. Although engagement and satisfaction with the self-help guide were higher than with the peer support element. I think that's not to say that peer support is not important or necessary. Participants definitely value the autistic-led peer support in our program as well, but it was perhaps that some of them weren't ready for it, and perhaps the way that it was provided could also be improved. Although the primary aim of our study was not to evaluate effectiveness, our initial findings did suggest that the program may have a positive impact on psychosocial outcomes, including reducing decisional conflict, disclosure-related distress, and to a lesser extent, stigma stress and internalized stigma. But this should be interpreted with caution given our small sample size, the study design, as well as participants' feedback on the measures used, which I will elaborate a bit more on in the next slide. To improve the program in the future, I think it would be good to incorporate more audio and visual materials, have a more flexible timeline, closer monitoring of participants' progress, as well as more initiation from facilitators. This was actually mentioned by our own facilitators as well, who said that they probably would have benefited from more guidance or instructions on, what questions they could post on the forum or topics to discuss so that they could provide more structured support to participants. Or it may be that a one-to-one format may be more suitable for participants who need more support to engage, and this may be worth exploring in future studies. To improve outcome measurement, while most of our participants said that the measures were easy to understand and complete, some did point out that there were general and binary statements that unfortunately could not fully capture the nuances of disclosure that was taught on the program. So for example, while the disclosure related distress scale asked about disclosing to a family member or friend, participants said that their level of comfort would really depend on the specific person and situation. I think there were some unclear questions on the internalized stigma scale as well, where people weren't sure if the question was asking about their own beliefs or other people's beliefs. And they also said that some items on social avoidance were tricky because they might avoid socializing, not because of stigma or internalized stigma, but simply because they do not want to or they do not enjoy socializing. So this suggests that it may be necessary to develop a more suitable autism-specific measure of internalized stigma in the future, or perhaps more positively framed as a self-acceptance scale in the future. Moving forward, I think adding booster sessions to the program and follow-up measures will also help to give us more insight into the longer-term impact of the program. And obviously, larger randomized controlled trial with hopefully a more diversified sample would also be needed to conclusively evaluate the effectiveness of the program. And I would just like to come full circle by emphasizing that, such support programs for autistic people should continue to be developed and evaluated alongside programs that target non-autistic people to change their attitudes and behaviors, so that the onus is not just on autistic people to strategize about disclosure and advocate for themselves, which we know can be very exhausting and emotional. So definitely more needs to be done at the societal level and the systemic level to tackle the root causes of stigma and internalized stigma. But to end off, I have included the references used in my presentation in case anyone wants to have a closer look at them. I think I would just highlight that my systematic review and consultation survey have been published, and the pilot study that I presented today is also available as a preprint if people are interested in reading them. Otherwise, I will stop sharing my slides now, and I welcome any questions or feedback. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much for that. It was insightful, it was beautiful, it was wonderful. I've actually written what I loved about it on here. You're open. The consultancy from the beginning is about openness. It was beautiful. You checked your understanding all the way through. You didn't expect there to be a matching of salience. You were flexible. You changed your mind about things when participants came and told you to do so. It was brilliant. You were inclusive because of those changes. I think it was an amazing piece of research. I will say that there are quite a few requests for things like the PDFs, for the slides, for the worksheets that you used. I hope we can make them available somehow at some point and make sure that everybody knows. Have you got any plans short term for making that available?
Sorry, just to clarify, this is about making the kind of materials from the program available. Yeah, so the short answer is not yet, but soon. The long answer is that this is something that we've been kind of debating for a while, because some of our participants asked us that as well. Can we share this, more widely? Seems that it will be really helpful, and we were keen, if this is something that would be helpful for the autistic community, we were keen to make it publicly available. But I think one concern that we had was that clearly some of the content can be distressing and emotional to work through alone. That's what our pilot study showed. And within the context of our research study, people had, the peer support, and we worried that there might be people who are working through these materials without the support that they may need. But after talking to more autistic people, I think the consensus was that, it should be their choice whether or not to take that risk. And so we decided that we would try and make it more widely available. And I'm actually in contact with the kind of wider HOP network. And what they're really keen to do is to consolidate all the different versions of HOP and put the materials all up on the website. So once that is kind of up and available, I'm sure we can announce it through our Cray social media as well.
We'll do that. And it's so exciting that it's actually part of a wider project, that it brings together and informs other people. It is a sign of great research. I'm going to ask you one question right at the end, which we have no more open questions, but my question is, what would you like to see happen with this? Where would you like to see it go? How would you like this to flourish and become part of the warp and weft of our society?
Yeah, I think starting with the HOP program, I think although what we've done here obviously is a very kind of small scale initial evaluation, but if it's proven to be helpful, I think I would like to see it something that's a bit more embedded into kind of local peer support groups maybe, and embedded into post-diagnostic support services, because I think a lot of participants in our program said that, you know, I wish I had this kind of support when I was first diagnosed. So having it embedded into the diagnostic pathway would be incredible. And I think that would help it not to be, you know, such a piecemeal and time-limited program, but something that's just part of the support that autistic people should receive when they are diagnosed and for their mental health and support and well-being. But of course, more widely as well, as I said towards the end of my talk, I think this is really just, again, a very small part of the larger efforts that are needed to tackle the root cause of why autistic people have to worry about disclosure in the first place. It's because of the public stigma and the systemic issues that discriminate against autistic people. So ultimately, I would like to see those deeper issues addressed and a safer and more inclusive society where autistic people no longer have to worry about when and whether and how to disclose, and they can freely be who they are without worrying about facing stigma and discrimination.
I love ending these webinars on that hope for a utopia. If we can't do it in academia, where else can we do it? Emeline, thank you ever so much for sharing your research with us today. And thank you to everyone who has joined us here at the Cray webinars. This talk will be available on our YouTube channel within a week or so. We hope that you can share that with people who might also find it interesting. Have yourselves a great evening. It's been a real pleasure. And even if I can't see you, I still love waving at you all. You take care, people. Have yourselves a great evening.
Thank you.